everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Dr. Aswani Volety has been on the job for about 6 weeks now as the new chancellor at UNC Wilmington. Now, many people know this is kind of a homecoming for Dr. Volety. He spent 5 years at UNCW from 2014 to 2019 as the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and then as the Executive Director of the Center for Marine Science. And then he went to Elon for 3 years to be the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs. People may also know that Dr. Volety worked his way up the education ladder, starting as an assistant professor at Florida Gulf Coast University back in 1999. But there are a lot of things people might not know about Aswani Volety, like how close he came to having an entirely different career outside of education, and when he first started going to school. Those are just a couple of the fun facts I learned when we sat down for our first full-length interview with the new UNCW Chancellor. Dr. Aswani Volety, the 7th Chancellor in the history of UNC Wilmington, welcome to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
Thank you so much.
What has the transition been like for you? You were here before, so it's not a foreign land.
Right.
But what's it been like coming into this chapter of your career?
Yeah, first off, it was the opportunity of a lifetime to come back to this great institution. Most importantly, it gave me an opportunity to give back to an institution that gave me so much and taught me so much. So when this opportunity arose, I was ecstatic. I'm even more thrilled that it worked out. It's been a month. Looking at the reception I got from practically every location on campus, faculty, staff, students, community members, it was humbling and gratifying at the same time. People are very warm, very welcoming.
You did research, you did teaching, but now that you're a university chancellor, when you look at that, is there satisfaction? Is there, I hope I can do this? What's the feeling like?
It was a gratifying experience. Obviously, you work hard throughout your career to be better every single day. I was a teacher, I was a scholar, I was a researcher, working with students, working with faculty members, collaborating with colleagues all over the world. It wasn't that I was aspiring to be a university administrator. In fact, a lot of times in your life, mentors happen, they tap you on your shoulder, they ask you questions that make you think of things that you haven't thought of before, opens doors, and same thing happened to me. My mentors at Florida Gulf Coast, they're the ones that encouraged me to look into administration. They recognize certain traits and talents. I told them I'm very happy doing what I do, but never say never.
Right.
When the opportunity to become a department chair came open, at that time what I heard from faculty, staff, and students is that if I had this, I can do more. This meaning course leads, lab space, startup funds, equipment. I had the opportunity to work with my supervisors, the deans, the provost, the president, university advancement, a lot of donors engaging in philanthropy to bring resources to these individuals and looking to see what they were able to do with the resources that were provided to them. I could mentor 1 or 2 or 3 more students per year, but working with outside donors and supervisors and letting them see that they are able to mentor 3 or 4 students each, and the multiplied effect and the difference that was making in students' lives, that was very gratifying.
Right.
So those opportunities are the ones that enabled me to be who I am today. Mentors happen. The opportunity to enable an individual to realize their full potential, that was the gratifying part. And same in the role of chancellor, the opportunity to make some decisions, setting the vision and direction of this institution, working with my collaborators and colleagues, faculty, staff, and students in the community to shape this institution and see how this can serve this greater region that's growing by leaps and bounds. That is a gratifying part. Playing a small role in the evolution of this great university and contributing to the region economic development those are the things that make me smile when I look at the chancellor name next to mine.
You've obviously worked under several chancellors, Florida Gulf Coast University, at Elon, here at UNCW. Will you take the best of those you've worked with? Will you eliminate some of their shortcomings? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, a lot actually. I consider myself a perpetual student. We all learn new things every single day.
We hope so, yes.
Yes, right?
Yes.
The idea is not to make the same mistakes over and over again. No different from me. I've made plenty of mistakes in my career, but hopefully I'm not making the same mistakes all the time. The opportunity to work with several leaders and what they've done was educational in the sense that not everybody had a fancy title next to their name. Not everybody was a president or a provost, etc. Just like not every heroes wear capes. They all had different strengths, different areas of expertise, but one thing was consistent: their care in the people they work with. Right? We work with people. This is a people's business, and so trying to emulate certain characteristics, and some of these traits are idiosyncratic or typical for that individual. What works for them doesn't necessarily work for a different individual.
Right. Yeah.
But you hope that you're looking at what they're doing and why they're doing, looking at the context, learn from it. And the idea is that every place does some things well and they could do some things better. No different than me, no different than UNCW. The idea is take the best qualities of these individuals and these institutions and adapt it to UNCW to see what makes sense for us. Right? Of course, in the same process, there are some things that, maybe that's not the best idea and that's not what we should do. So I hope to gain from the expertise of other individuals, emulate the good characteristics, and not repeat the mistakes that others have done, including me.
You came to the United States in 1990 to pursue your doctorate in marine science. We're going to go into your early years here in a little while, but in the time you've been here, how has education changed? I can tell you how TV has changed and TV news has changed. But you've seen education in this country now for the better part of 30 plus years. How has it changed? Or is it just, I teach, you learn?
No, education has changed a lot. People have changed. When I look at my children, the way they learn, things they expect is very different from me when I was going through school. No different than today's students. The way they consume information, the way they think, the way they collaborate, the way they focus on the impact versus resources per se. A lot has changed. For that matter, technology has changed higher education too. Right? Back in those days, we could not think about remote education. But these days, when you talk about Zoom, you don't need to expand on what it means. It's like Xeroxing or something else.
Faxing,
right?
20 years ago, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So education has changed for sure. There is a lot more emphasis on application. Of course, we learn concepts and principles in a classroom setting, but the focus these days has been on how do you use these concepts and principles and apply it to the real world to solve real world solutions. Right? The education and the disciplines have evolved and changed. That gone are the days where this is biology or chemistry or mathematics and computer science. The combination of all these disciplines and how they come together to solve real world problems, that has changed. So it fostered skills that you get from a liberal arts and sciences institution, just like the one that UNCW provides. Critical thinking, communication, whether it is verbal or written, collaboration, working across times with individuals that span the globe. Right? I use the example of drug discovery, given the number of contract research organizations we have in this area.
Sure, yeah.
Right? So bringing a drug to the market is not just chemistry, it is mathematical modeling as it is chemistry. Testing the drug on organisms is just as much microbiology and genetics and cellular biology as it is chemistry. It's the interdisciplinary nature of bringing all these disciplines to come up with an outcome or a product that has changed. And so collaboration, critical thinking, communication, the essential skills combined with the technical skills that the employers are looking for. That's what today's education is all about.
So basically, if I'm hearing you correctly, 30 years ago, even 50 when I was in school, you had one lane math, one lane science, one lane English, one lane history, and now these highways are intersecting in more places than we even know.
Absolutely, and they will continue to be even more complex.
When the national search started, when Chancellor Sartorelli decided he was going to step down, when you heard about this opening, did you think you had a chance? Did you sit back and say, well, you know, I was there, I know I'm qualified, let's give it a shot, or I think I can be the next chancellor at UNCW? What was your thought process?
Well, the cocky self says, I have a great shot. I know the place. I've contributed. I put in a lot of sweat equity into developing this institution.
Sure.
Be it programs, students, grants, infrastructure, know the Wilmington community, donors, etc. But the realistic part is there are a lot of very qualified individuals such as myself. And so as much as you think you have a great shot, one of my mentors said, you don't have the job till you have the job.
Right.
So going through the process was very educational. Of course, I'm very pleased with the outcome, clearly.
Sure, yeah, I can understand, yeah.
No, I mean, I think I knew I had a great shot, only because I worked with Chancellor Sartorelli. Both of us worked together, be it in philanthropy, be it new programs, infrastructure, so on and so forth. So I knew I would have a less steep learning curve. I won't say there's not a learning curve, there is. But I think the familiarity with the place and this institution and this broader community, that was the attractive part.
Take me back to the day you found out you were going to get the chance. How did you find out? Well,
President Holmes called me and he said, can we set up a time to talk on such and such day? I was very pleased. Obviously, I've been going through multiple interview processes, multiple steps, etc. So I knew things are progressing in the right direction. So when he called me, we discussed on the phone to make the job offer. Like I said, it was very gratifying in the sense that this was an opportunity to give back to an institution that taught me so much and gave me so much, like I mentioned. So that was very appealing. And my wife and daughters were still living in Wilmington, so it was,
they stayed here while you went to Elon, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. At that time, while she did have the position at Elon, she could have moved to Elon. My daughters were in middle school and high school, a lot of transition. And next year, the next 2 years were COVID years. And remote learning, a lot of transition, so we didn't necessarily want to disrupt their lives even more than what it is. And so they stayed here, I was at Elon, and of course every weekend I was coming down or they were coming up, depending on our schedules, a lot of commute. So when this opportunity came up, actually I told my family that I'm going to look into this position, and what do you think? My older daughter, she was at the School of Science and Math, so she was already out of the house, and she said, I'm out of the house and I'll be in college, so I don't really care what you do.
And your younger daughter, I imagine.
My younger daughter, I told her, I said, if I get the job, obviously I'm coming back. If I don't get the job, you'll be moving to Elon. And her response was, then you better get the job.
That's funny. How did they react when you told them that you did get the offer and you were going to take it?
They were very pleased.
Yeah.
Because now the family's in one place as opposed to 3 different places. My wife jokes that it helps for both of us to be in the same county in terms of kids drop-offs and pickups and cheer practice and piano lessons and a lot of juggling. Anybody who has kids know their lives are a lot busier than ours.
And so gas $5 a gallon probably is, it's a lot easier to go back and forth across town to Hoggard than it is to go to Elon.
Because the kids grew up here, they have friends here. Even for me, this is home. So coming back was special for me. And for them, they didn't have to leave, and this is home. All their friends were in the neighborhood schools, cheer practice, swim practice, and all those. So it was a lot easier for them.
If I'm not mistaken, you came about this close to being a physician doctor instead of an education doctor. So if not for a couple of points, we may be talking to you about a cure for a disease rather than leading UNCW.
It is. I went to school when I was very young. I went to school when I was 2 years old. I finished my high school at 15 and college at 18 and my master's at 20.
Wait, you went to school at 2?
Yeah, I went to school when I was 2 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you building the blocks higher than anybody else on the block? Or I mean, that's amazing to me. You hear of children starting early, but you must have shown a lot of potential back then.
Or my mom thought I was making I was making a lot of ruckus at home. Better off being at school than at home, but
that's funny. But anyway, you did want to pursue being a medical doctor.
I did. My mom's sister was a doctor. She lived in the United States for nearly 60 years. So growing up, she was a role model to me because I grew up in a low income. I was a first generation student to go to college from my immediate family. So for me, growing up, she was a role model. And I wanted to be like her, be a doctor.
Sure.
In India, you go into medical school after high school, up to your 12th grade. It's a longer medical school. But I was 3 years younger to be able to take the medical entrance exam. So I went to pursue my undergraduate degree.
Okay.
So the first time I was able to take the medical entrance exam was the same time like my finals of my bachelor's.
Oh, no.
And obviously I took both the exams, but I missed the medical entrance by 1 point. Wow. By that time I was already in graduate school. And so at that point the calculus was, do I really want to go back to right after high school and go into med school, or do I pursue higher ed, go into graduate school? Always wanted to go to the United States for higher education. Knowing the higher ed space and collaborating with faculty and staff across the globe, I'm even more convinced that the education in the U.S. is by far the best in the world. We bring the right combination of flexibility, essential skills, technical skills, and develop a citizen for the longer term.
You attended William and Mary University for your master's here, correct?
PhD for
doctorate. I'm sorry, doctorate. Yeah. When you walked onto that campus, was that the first time you'd been in the United States?
Yes, that was my first entrance to the United States.
Take me back to that. What was that like for you?
I grew up in a decent-sized city, about 1 million, 2 million people. In Indian standards, that's a smaller city, and here it might be a bigger city.
Right.
So my frame of reference, thought process, bigger cities, bigger buildings, more population. So when I was going to School of Marine Science, which happens to be in Yorktown or Gloucester Point in Virginia, 10 miles from Williamsburg,
right.
I was looking like this, looking at buildings, and the buildings were there, coming off the bridge. But I mean, it was a great place to receive education. People were very generous with their time. In how they embraced not just me, but all the international students that came to the school.
What was your first impression of the United States as a whole, though? I imagine you had heard about the U.S. growing up in India, but actually here and seeing the cars on the road, or seeing just life in this country for the very first time. What was that impression like for you?
This might be a bias, but I suspect for most people, when they think about United States, you're thinking about Los Angeles and New York and DC, big cities, more people, skyscrapers. But really, America is more suburbia, more rural. Your bias is this is fast-paced individuals that may or may not pay attention to you, but it's a very generous country. People are very nice, they're very caring, they go out of their way to help you, just like they did for me. So seeing, while you had a bias as to what America was in your mind, it's a very different America when somebody comes here. People are very generous, people are very helpful. It's the average person that doesn't necessarily live in a skyscraper, that doesn't necessarily drive a fancy car. Not everything is about baseball or NBA and skyscrapers and other things, right? So it's the normal America where people care about each other, people help each other. So that's the real America I came to love it.
Right.
And so going to William and Mary and Gloucester Point there at that time, people didn't even lock their doors. That was normal. Right. It was a very safe place.
Right.
When somebody that looked different than the surrounding population, but then when I walked into a store, they knew I was a student at William & Mary, probably came from India, Mexico, Canada, Netherlands, wherever, people from all over the world. Very helpful. They knew that I was looking for help. They were very helpful. Got a great experience there.
What about your childhood? What were your parents like? Obviously, if you went to school at the age of 2, they encouraged education. But what was a childhood like for you? I imagine you lived in a coastal community in India, correct?
Yes.
What was mom and dad, did they work? What was the family life like?
My mom was a homemaker. My dad worked in a movie theater. Like I said, I grew up in a one-room house with something that is akin to a kitchen. That was the house.
Right.
I don't mean a one-bedroom house.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's whether it is my kids or other individuals. When I talk to them about resources, entitlement, and other things, I have a very different perspective as to what I had and what I have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Education made a difference in my life. Education enabled me to have the opportunities I have today. It changed the trajectory of my family.
Sure.
Right? That's what education does for individuals, whether it happens to be in India, whether it happens to be in the United States, or any place else in the world. And therefore, education is personal for me. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I tell the students. Now, I want every Seahawk that comes through UNCW to have the same opportunities and experiences that made a difference in my life happen to them, because I wanted them to be just as good or better than what I'd have.
I oftentimes, and to hear you say that, when we get students, whether they're from UNCW or UNC or wherever, and they're interning with us, I tell them so often that this is such an opportunity for you. You come in here, you can learn what it's like to be in a working newsroom. This can often tell you that this is what I want to do, or this is what I do not want to do.
Absolutely.
Please take advantage of the opportunity. I get the sense you feel the same about higher education for these young men and women.
Absolutely. What I'm very proud of is the engaged learning or the experiential learning opportunities that students at UNCW gets. The skills that UNCW students get are the essential skills that come with the liberal arts and sciences education, overlaid or coupled with the technical skills that employers are looking for. It's the combination of these two skills that's what employers are looking for.
Sure.
Right? So in other words, it's taking the concepts and principles and applying to solve real world problems. That happens through internships, that happens through undergraduate research, that happens through co-ops, all the cultural awareness or cultural competence that comes with study abroad programs. It's a shrinking world, right? And it's how do we take these things that we learn inside a classroom and use it to solve real world problems.
Right.
That's the key, right? In other words, there has to be a clear sightline between classroom and career, or curriculum and life. You really need to raise the boundaries between what happens inside the classroom with the real world. You really need to collaborate with the community, because you have an expertise on campus and there is a need in the community. You need to make sure that these are connected. At the same time, you also need to learn from the community and bring back into the classroom practitioners like yourself, right? There is nothing that prepares them to do what you do just by reading books.
Right.
They really need to come here, work with people like you and all your collaborators that enable a program like this to happen. There are a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that happen behind the scenes to make this seamless.
And I try to tell the students all the time, please take advantage of this. And sometimes 7 or 8 or 9 weeks in, that light bulb goes off, and you're like, boy, I wish that would have gone off 5 weeks ago, but it went off. You know, and when you see them love and learn to love the possibility, not necessarily the job, but the possibility, to me, that's the most valuable thing about an internship.
Absolutely. And talking about the possibilities, right? And that's what mentors enable. That's what opportunities enable people to think of. Like I said, I'm fortunate in the sense that my kids know what is possible, right? There are a lot of kids that don't know what is possible. They can't even dream because they don't really know what is possible, right? But opportunities like education, the mentors, the internships, these enable them to expand their view, field of view, and look at things through a different lens and experience. Then they realize what is possible. Right? Once people know what is possible, then they have somewhere to strive to or towards.
You mentioned earlier, while you were at Florida Gulf Coast, and you did a ton of research there. You were there for about 15 years, from what I can gather. Who was that person who gave Aswani that little shove toward being an administrator? Is there one person that kind of gave you that little, you can do this?
Yeah, actually, there are a few people that gave me the nudge. I was a brand new faculty member in the Marine and Mammal Sciences Department.
You started as an assistant professor and then worked your way up the line, right?
Did, yeah. When my dean at the time, Carolyn Gray, she approached me to be the department chair, and I told her I'm the youngest faculty member in the department. Now, why would I want to have the department chair? Went through some conversations. No, she highlighted some of the skills that I have, why I would make a good department chair. I was flattered. I thanked her for her trust and support, but I like doing what I'm doing. I'm working with students, being in the classroom, being in the lab. My research was very applied research, so it was very gratifying to see how it translated to
that's
things.
50-some pages long that I went through, but you were doing a great job of research, and it seemed like you were really headed that way full time.
Yeah, and the next dean, and after that, the provost, Ron Toll, and President Wilson Bradshaw, these two individuals, I consider them mentors. They're the ones that really gave me the nudge to look into this administrative route. While I resisted initially, once I started doing it, doing the job, and seeing what I was able to do in terms of helping individuals in the department and the multiplier effect that I talked about. I think that was the reason I decided to look in this direction.
I was looking through some of the research project you did, and they're too numerous, like I said, but you know, it covers everything from mercury accumulation in sharks, Florida's coastal waters, to sea level rise, to the influence of salinity on crabs and oyster reefs in Florida. And then in 2019, you served as the director of the North and South American chapter of the World Oyster Society. Where did the love for marine life come from?
Yeah.
Was that because you lived off a coast, in a coastal community?
Yeah, I grew up in a coastal community. I've always lived on the coast. The ocean, the beach has a special place in my heart, not just because it looks pretty, although it does.
Right, yeah.
So when I came to William and Mary, I looked at what enables populations to grow or not. In this case, I picked shellfish because of the ecological and economic value these individuals have for Chesapeake Bay.
Sure.
I was looking at the diseases have always existed, the hosts have always existed, but you and I don't get sick on a daily basis, right? But sometimes we do.
Right.
So what tips the balance whether we are healthy or not? Same thing for shellfish. What enables them to survive or not? And the role that humans play in tipping the balance one way or another, whether it happens to be changing the way we develop the land and the way the water flows into rivers and estuaries and the coastal areas, the contaminants that they transport and carry on. So I was involved in modeling those complex interactions and see the way we are managing the land, how does it affect the marine environment. I chose oysters as model organisms because oysters create three-dimensional structures that create food, shelter, and habitat for over 300 marine species. So think about it as the home. If that falls apart, the whole ecosystem falls apart. Yeah. So I was using oysters as canaries in the coal mine, saying if these are doing well, it is because of the water quality around them. If they're not doing well, it's because of the water quality that's around them.
So the focal point of marine life is where you really pegged it then, right?
It is.
That's fascinating to me that you, because of a love for the beach and water, you went because, you know, I don't know how many, but it looked like at least 3 or 4 dozen different published reports that you've done over the years.
It did, fair amount.
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I like my research also is because it's very applied in nature. For example, one of my projects has been Everglades restoration. In other words, the water used to flow a certain way in the peninsula of Florida, coming from Okeechobee into Everglades. No, water was clean by the time we went to Florida Bay, creates seagrasses and coral reefs and all those things. Of course, a few things which happened in the past 100 years, including ag areas and a lot of population. So it's a very engineered system right now. And so the idea was to put it back to how it was as much as possible. And so it involves replumbing of Florida waters. That means some rivers are going to get more fresh water, some are going to get less fresh water, and therefore the salinity changes. Right, so my job was to model these interactions and see how do we optimize the outcome, in this case the health of the marine organisms. And that's the same thinking that I bring to running this university. There are a lot of stresses, a lot of strains, but the focus is on the student success outcomes. So how do we optimize all those things to ensure that we are giving the students a great education and great experiences, create engaged citizens, and make them productive citizens of this community. So really optimizing the student success with all the noise, it's similar.
Well, this may sound like a strange question, but can you go on a boat ride and enjoy yourself, or are you always thinking about, oh, look at that water, oh, there's an oyster? And can you literally go on a ride, or are you always thinking about what's under the water?
I do both. Whenever I go to whether it happens to be a dock, whether it happens to be a body of water, I'm looking at it to see what organisms are living there, so that it gives me an idea as to what the salinity content is and what is growing there.
So you have different. You have to really take one hat off and put the other hat on just to enjoy it.
But I do like the wind in my hair and enjoying the clean air and the open spaces, and I do both.
Yeah, I can imagine with all the work that you've done, you can't look at a body of water without thinking of different things. Your wife is also in university education, was also at Florida Gulf Coast University. Is that where you met?
We actually met in graduate school at William & Mary.
Okay.
Yeah, so we met in graduate school. Then I moved to EPL lab in Pensacola. I had a National Academy of Sciences fellowship.
Right.
So she was finishing master's at that time, and then she went into her PhD program. And since that time, I moved to Florida Gulf Coast. By that time, she finished her PhD, and we were fortunate that she had a faculty position at Florida Gulf Coast too. So both of us worked at Florida Gulf Coast for nearly 15 years.
So you've shared a lot of higher education life along with the family life that you've been together.
We do.
How important is she to your success? I tell people all the time, I married a saint. I could not be nearly as successful or done this for as long as I possibly could without Sheila at home, because with all the hours I worked, she really did a lot of the raising of our children. How important is your wife to your success?
Very. Not just for my success, but the success of my children as well. It's always a team sport. It's never an individual sport. Also, given my responsibilities, given my job, sometimes I had less flexibility than her. So she might drop off kids at swim practice or piano lessons, and she might say, well, when your event is done, can you pick them up and bring them home? I'll get dinner started. Okay. Or, no, I'm running around with kids, can you get dinner started? So it's always a team sport, but without her support and what she does with her with our kids, I wouldn't be successful, as successful as I am, but more importantly, my kids. She pays a lot more attention about their schools and the classes and extracurricular activities and science fairs and science Olympiads. You know, both my kids do very, very well. I'd like to take credit, but it's really because of their mom. Yeah,
and she also is a professor and researcher and everything else like that. So it's interesting that the impact that she has had not only on your life but on your daughters. Tell me about your daughters. Do you think they'll aspire to go into higher education, or do you think they've seen mom and dad and all the hours you have to put in?
I'm not sure if they will go into higher education or not, but they will have higher education degrees. That I'm confident. Like I said, thanks to the great education this country provides, both of them went to public schools. They did really well. Between my wife and I and helping them and the help the teachers gave, they did very, very well in school. Like I said, one of my daughters went to School of Science and Math, and obviously number 2 ranked high school in the country for public schools.
Sure.
She had opportunities to go to multiple places. She turned down an Ivy League school, and she wanted to go to UNC. It felt like a great fit for what she wanted to do.
Another Tar Heel in southeastern North Carolina.
Indeed, and my older daughter probably will either go into medical research or medical doctor. That's what she hopes to do right now. My younger daughter is just as accomplished as her sister, but she probably wants to do something slightly different than the older sister.
Sure.
She might go into marketing or business, or she might end up in healthcare. Who knows? She's a freshman in high school, so we got a little bit of time.
Yep. And that's a you got to give her a couple of years at least
Indeed.
to make up her mind what she wants to do. Not like it seems like you have a lot of free time, but what do you do when you have free time? Where might someone see Dr. Volety? Will they see him biking? Will they see him running? Down on the dock reading a book?
I love reading. I love cooking. I love gardening. I like to travel different parts, whether it happens to be in the United States, state and national parks, or overseas. I like wine. I'm a very social person. I like interacting with people. I take long walks. When I'm disciplined enough, I engage in a little bit of rowing and have a rower. But really, gardening, cooking, walking, reading are my passions.
So are you apt to move a bush here and there, or are you that kind of gardener, or do you just? Because I am. I'll let something grow for a little bit. Now, okay, time for you to move, and I'll switch things around in the backyard. Drives my wife crazy, but that's the way I am as far as gardening is
I'm more into edible gardening. So anywhere from starting off with lettuce in the beginning of the season to switching over to sugar snap peas or something, to tomatoes and peppers and all kinds of herbs. So that's the way I process the day and decompress when I get home. I might not even take my jacket off, might pull the weeds, process the day, see what's going in the garden, what's in the fridge, what are you in a mood to eat, and I might put stuff together.
That downtime necessary? Yeah, I think so too. My dad used to do that, and we'd see him out there after a long day, and he'd be out in the garden for 30 minutes or so. What's Dad doing? Yeah, it's his time. Leave him alone. That's what he needed.
Yeah. Also with cooking, it's the creative aspects of things. It's the cultural elements of things. It's food also brings people together. So, getting to know about the other individual, their upbringing, how did their culture influence what they eat, how they think. So food brings people together. So that's another passion of mine. So
last question for you, because your time is very valuable. Now that you have this job ahead of you, you've been a researcher, you've been an educator. What do you see the top priority for a university chancellor to be? Are you still an educator? Are you an administrator? Are you a fundraiser? What is priority number one as you've had now a month to take this job in?
The honest answer is all. And because these are all intertwined. I just graduated one of my master's students a couple of weeks ago. She worked with my wife and other faculty member looking at how organisms take up genetics, how long does it stay in the body, are there any physiological impairments because of take up genetics and all those things. So I live vicariously through my students, the creative aspects and other things. So that's one. But it's really education, whether it happens to be inside the classroom, outside the classroom in a laboratory setting, or in the field setting. It's enabling individuals to get education, right? That's a passion of mine. And you enable those things through working with the legislators and the Board of Governors and the UNC System Office. That is enabled by working with very, very generous people like this community, donors that engage in philanthropy, connecting their passion with the need for our students. Right? All these pieces to come together to enable education happen that creates opportunities for these students. So that's what I'm passionate about. So it takes multiple forms, be it inside the classroom, outside the classroom, working with donors, working with the legislature, but the end goal being, how do I ensure that students in this region have a great education that enables them to have a great career and a fulfilling life? I think that's what drives me.
Do you think you have to rely on your experiences that have worked in the past moving forward?
Certainly. Like I said, our opinions are influenced by our experiences and perspectives, right? But the good thing is also that I'm not working by myself. I don't make all the decisions by myself. I had the fortune of working with some very, very good individuals that happen to work with me on my cabinet. Sure. So it's the bringing together these individuals with tremendous passion, expertise, and wisdom, and considering all the perspectives and making the best decision possible for this institution and this region. That's what I need to do. It's not that I do all those things just based on my experience. It's I have a team. I need to harness the collective wisdom and make the best decision possible.
Well, I appreciate you coming in, and I appreciate you pulling the curtain back a little bit, letting us learn a little bit more. Dr. Aswani Volety, 7th Chancellor in the history of UNC Wilmington, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I am ecstatic about the potential that UNCW has.
A big thank you to Dr. Aswani Volety for sparing time from his busy schedule and coming here to the studio and joining us for this week's podcast interview. You can learn a lot more about his career and keep up with his work as Chancellor of UNCW by going to the website uncw.edu. Now, before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please download and subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app you use to listen to your favorite shows. And if you would be so kind, please leave us a rating or a review. We'd love to hear what you think of our interviews, and the more feedback we get from friends like you, the higher we'll be listed on the podcast apps, and the better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of One-on-One.